Have you ever opened a zip file and saw a folder named what the file should be named and another one named __macOS? Sorry, macOS X. Why is there a folder named macOS X? Today I will tell you and explain you the brief story of a Unix branch operating system kernel. Okay, before I start, epilepsy warning in 3, 2, 1. So to start the story, we have to go back a long time. Chapter 1, Unix. Yes, we have to talk about it. 1969, Bell Labs. Which is a crazy story in itself with AT&T and all that. An operating system was made, first named Unix, then later named Unix, was pretty revolutionary in how portable and versatile it was. There's a lot to talk about here, but really the only thing to know is that Unix was good and Unix was big, and a lot of branches grew from it. One of them being BSD. BSD, or the Berkeley Software Distribution, being a fork from the 6th edition of Unix. It later had a modified kernel and would spawn a lot of own forks like FreeBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD, and my favorite, Dragonfly BSD, which you should donate to. Sorry for the tangent, but the info is necessary. But why am I telling you this? When 4.2 BSD was made, a lot of forks started popping up. Examples for this are SunOS, which would later become Solaris, Unix, which nobody has ever heard about, and the Mac microkernel, sort of. So here in 1985 at the Carnegie Mellon University, or CMU for short, the 4.2 BSD kernel was used and slowly reconstructed into a microkernel. Sorry, I need another tangent. Before I continue with the story, I will have to explain what the kernel even is and what makes a microkernel so different. A kernel, which you could probably dissect from context clues and the fucking name, is a core of something. Something being the operating system, or OS for short. And what is an operating system? OS is what makes your computer operate using a determined system, except when it isn't determined, or it doesn't operate at all. The only thing that you have to really know is that the OS is pretty much everything. It loads drivers, it manages file system access, it lets programs communicate with each other, it does the scheduling of processes and allows multiple to run at a time. It just does a lot. And the kernel is the core of all of this. It's the lowest layer of the OS. It's what talks with the hardware. It's what tells your CPU what to execute. It's what tells your GPU what to draw on a level which can be acted upon by the components. Now that you know what the kernel is, you still have to know what a kernel type is. Because if you remember, I talked about the Mac microkernel, which is sort of a subtype of kernel. So the kernel type tells you how much the kernel is allowed to do. A normal monolithic kernel basically does everything that we previously discussed the kernel doing. So a lot of different jobs. A microkernel, in contrast, as you might have guessed by the name and context clues, is only managing the most basic of components needed to run the machine. The file system and drivers, as well as the communication of the processes, is not done by the kernel and has to be done externally. Why would anybody do this? The reason is simple. A kernel needs to lie in memory and takes up space. The smaller the kernel, the less space it takes up, and the more space there is for other stuff. Apart from that, microkernels are often also securer and have more stability. This is because the smaller microkernel has less responsibilities, and so it has less chance of crashing because one of the system components had an error. Okay, now that the way too long tangent is over, let's continue the tale. So where does this all lead? Chapter 2. Next. Next, a company founded in 1985 by Steve Jobs, which you probably have never heard about. It was basically Steve Jobs' attempt to create a second Apple. Semi-expensive hardware and user-friendly software for a high price. But what did Next do? Produce workstation computers. The first one released was the Next Cube in 1989, a foot-sized computer running a Motorola 68030 CPU and a 68882 floating point coprocessor. And I would talk about the technical details more, but that isn't the topic of the video and my tangents and cotangents blowed everything. Just to note, I've started work on a video script specifically about Motorola CPUs 4 months ago. I promise I'll finish it someday, but it keeps expanding and my habit of going on tangents is really hindering me in that case specifically. But back to the Minecraft computer. It had mouse and keyboard support and notably used an operating system called NextStep, which was built from 4.3 BSD on top of a Mac 2.5 kernel, which over time sort of morphed into a hybrid kernel. What's a hybrid kernel? Think of it as a halfway solution in between monolithic and micro. Drivers and inter-process communication are now again primarily done by the kernel, whilst the file system is run outside of the core. So it's a jack of all trades, master of none, or something. I genuinely feel fucking retarded writing like this about some OS component. Like they are a TF2 webm or some shit. This entire video is just so fucking gay. This new homunculus kernel came to be known as the XNU hybrid kernel, where XNU stands for X is not Unix. This name is, as far as I can tell, a reference to the much more well-known GNU or GNU acronym, which stands for GNU's not Unix. Back to the story. Next as a company had some success for some time, but started struggling from the beginning of the 90s onwards. This decline of Next continued until 1997, where the company was bought by Apple for over $400 million. This inadvertently had two effects. The first one is Steve Jobs' return to Apple. With Next vacuumed up, he swiftly ascended into the CEO position. The second effect, caused by the first one, was a little more complicated. That's why I'm going to name the following chapter, Chapter 3, X is not macOS. After the merger, the Next Step operating system was majorly improved by updating the Mac microkernel components to version 3 and adding components from the monolithic FreeBSD kernel as well as some code from NetBSD and OpenBSD. If you remember, these were all flavors from one of the more popular Unix branches, the BSD branch. A note about Unix forks with a BSD tinge, they are often known for some standout features. Many of them have strong network implementations. BSD actually was one of the early adapters of TCP/IP because they started using it in 1983 with version 4.2. This is why BSDs nowadays often are used to run routers, firewalls, NAS, SSS, and the PlayStation's operating system. Another trait BSDs commonly share is high security and stability with, for example, jails in FreeBSD. Jails allow the creation of multiple virtual environments on one host machine. Each virtualized environment is an isolated system with its own processes, files, and users. This ensures programs running much more stable, as they can't interfere with one another anymore. So basically the container before the container. But back to our epic saga. Now the improved XNU kernel, infused with the power of the free BSDs, as well as the malleability of the Mac microkernel. The now XNU kernel could move on to its greatest task, saving the Mac world. Because at the point macOS, the original one, was a genuine piece of shit which crashed and burned all the time. Or at least that is what I can glean from some articles and Reddit posts, so only the most trustworthy of sources. Apple had tried to modernize their OS via a project called Copeland, but that really didn't pan out. The time investment was too big, especially now when they had access to a much more powerful proven operating system through their recent acquisition. And so the tale of classic macOS ends, with it being replaced. The XNU kernel was used as the basis for the next new macOS version, and this is where we come full circle, because on March 24th in 2001, macOS X 10.0 Cheetah was released. The X in macOS X, of course, coming from the X's which were put on the graveyard for classic macOS fans. And also because it sounded cool. And also because of the now integrated XNU kernel. In 2016, macOS X was renamed to just macOS, which is pretty underwhelming. And this is where we are today, with modern macOS now being at version 26? That can't be right. Just 2 years ago it still was version 15? Ah, they did it to synchronize the versions of all their OSs. So not just macOS, but also iOS, iPadOS and watchOS. But, remember the opening of the video with the __ macOS folder? Yes, now I'm also going to explain that. Hint, it has something to do with metadata. The __ macOS file comes from something related to macOS X obviously, because files are stored in 2 blocks of data. A data fork, which stores the actual information and data, and a resource fork, this is where the aforementioned metadata resides. It is created when you zip a file with Finder, which is the Mac's equivalent to the Windows Explorer. So we're now at the end. So is there a conclusion? Yes, actually. Through all the thinking, writing, researching and editing, I've been thinking a lot about macOS X. And yes, I say macOS X and not macOS 10 because I'm not a fucking retard. So even after all the changes and the layers of abstraction added throughout the years, X is still a Unix. No, these shirts aren't available for purchase.